What if you weren't too old to matter, just stuck in the wrong lane? George Miller stared through the bug-splattered windshield of his '97 Buick, eyes glazed, jaw slack, as brake lights pulsed endlessly ahead. 6:30 in the morning, and already the freeway was a parking lot. The sky was barely awake, a dull bruised blue, and the static voice of the traffic report on AM radio matched the color exactly. Another 30-minute delay on the 405 South due to construction near Sepulveda. Best to find alternate routes, if there are any left. George huffed through his nose and slapped the steering wheel. Great, he muttered, rolling his neck. His bones cracked like firewood. Today was his 6-month checkup, which meant Dr. Patel would remind him to take it easy, that stress isn't good for a man in his 70s, and that Parkinson's doesn't negotiate. And yet here he was, doing exactly what everyone told him not to do. Fighting Los Angeles traffic like he was still 25 and invincible. He turned the dial. A news segment crackled to life. This morning, Elon Musk's Boring Company unveiled the first operational tunnel running beneath LA, a high-speed electric transit system that completely bypasses surface traffic. Designed to cut 2-hour drives into 8-minute rides, the loop is already moving passengers beneath the city. The future, it seems, has arrived. George blinked. For a moment, the report cut through the fog in his brain. A tunnel? Under the city? He pictured it, quiet, sleek, fast. Just drive down into the earth, skip the chaos, and emerge on the other side like nothing happened. He imagined what that might feel like. Like cheating time itself. He grunted again, this time with something between envy and admiration. Yeah, he muttered. For people who still matter. Behind him, a horn blared. He hadn't moved when the traffic crawled forward 10 feet. He waved a lazy apology and crept ahead. His left hand trembled slightly on the gearshift. He clenched his fingers and tucked the hand into his lap. He hated when it did that. It was new. And it was getting worse. Somewhere deep in his chest, a familiar ache stirred, not in his body, but in that part of the soul that remembers being useful. He used to fix things. Real things. Cars, engines, hydraulics. Back when machines made sense and didn't talk back. There was a time when people came to George to solve problems. Now, they mostly ignored him, or worse, patronized him. The Buick coughed as he turned off the freeway toward the clinic. Potholes rattled its bones. He parked under the brittle shade of a palm tree, took a breath, and looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror. Wrinkles carved canyons across his forehead. His eyes, once electric, now seemed like burnt-out bulbs. But behind them, something flickered. Not quite anger. Not quite hope. More like hunger. The kind that used to drive him to sketch ideas on napkins and stay up late in the garage making prototypes out of junkyard scrap. He shut off the engine. Leave a comment with where you're watching from, said the voice in his head suddenly, echoing one of those YouTube vloggers Lisa used to watch. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? He scoffed out loud. Where I'm watching from? Right here. Stuck in my own life. He closed his eyes. The tunnel. That news story. Elon Musk. The name alone stirred something in George, resentment, admiration, confusion. The man built rockets and tunnels like they were Lego sets. He broke every rule, every limit. He didn't seem to care about being realistic. George used to be like that once. Used to. Inside the clinic, fluorescent lights buzzed as Dr. Patel scrolled through charts. George sat on the table, feet dangling like a kid waiting to be scolded. You've lost weight, Patel said, not entirely pleased. And your tremors slightly more pronounced. Have you been pushing yourself? George shrugged. Define pushing. I mean overexertion. Stress. Lack of rest. Working late. Any of that ring a bell? George smiled without humor. Does sitting in traffic count? Patel didn't laugh. George, he said, softening, you've always been active, and I admire that. But you need to understand that your body has limits now. Pushing against those limits won't reverse anything. You need to adapt, not fight. George looked at the wall. On it hung a poster of an elderly couple smiling under the words, "Healthy aging is graceful aging." He wanted to rip it down. Maybe I don't want to be graceful, he said. Dr. Patel didn't respond. The silence said enough. Outside, the heat had started to rise. The sun climbed higher, and the glare off the cars had stung George's eyes. He slid in, turned the key, and sat there without shifting into gear. A tunnel, he whispered. Under the city. Who the hell thinks of that? He knew who. Elon Musk. The guy people either worshipped or wanted cancelled. But you couldn't argue with the results. Tunnels, cars that drove themselves. Rockets that landed backward. While George sat in traffic, this guy was digging shortcuts under the world. George's fingers tapped the steering wheel unconsciously. A rhythm. A pattern. Like he used to do before sketching a new concept. It had been years since he had that itch. Years since he thought his ideas were worth a damn. And now, one damn quote from a radio segment, had somehow lodged itself in his brain like a splinter. He drove home the long way, avoiding the freeway. At every red light, the same thought nagged him. It didn't shout. It whispered. What if it's not over? At home, the air was stale, the living room dim, and the only sound was the hum of the fridge in the kitchen. Dust lay on the TV stand like a burial shroud. George didn't turn on the lights. He walked to the garage. The door creaked open on rusted hinges, revealing a world that hadn't moved in over a decade. Shelves of tools, boxes of parts, papers yellowed with time. And in the corner, under a tarp, his old workbench. He stepped in. The smell hit him first, oil, rubber, metal. Memory. He pulled the tarp aside. There they were. Sketches of his old project, the glide car. He laughed, a sound that caught in his throat like a sob. You beautiful, useless thing, he whispered. A design meant to float slightly above a magnetic rail system, his idea for efficient urban transport in the 80s, long before the tech existed to make it real. Everyone said it was science fiction. That he was dreaming too big. That it would never work. He believed them. He gave up. And now here comes Elon Musk, building tunnels with sleek electric sleds, just like George once imagined. The glide car wasn't useless. It was early. Maybe too early. Or maybe he was just too easy to stop. His hand hovered over the plans. They looked simple now. Clean. Sharp. The ideas were still sound. His eyes scanned the garage. The tools were all there. Rusty, maybe. But real. And so were his hands. Shaky, yes. But still here. Still his. The tremor returned as he lifted the blueprint. This time, he didn't hide it. Maybe I'm not done yet, he said. And something in the room seemed to agree. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? George Miller had once believed in the future. Not in the vague, abstract way politicians or commercials did, but in the physical sense, in levers and magnets and pistons that whispered to him late at night when the house was quiet and the world still had sharp edges. Back in 1986, before his back started to stiffen and before his daughter started calling him stubborn instead of brilliant, he would stay up past midnight in his garage, blueprinting concepts that never made it past the paper stage. He was a mechanic by trade, but an inventor at heart. The shop he worked at down on Western Avenue was a place where old men yelled over engines and swore with love. He loved it too, grease under his nails, the hiss of welding torches, the snap of sockets locking into place. But after work, that's when the real work began. In the same garage he'd just walked back into for the first time in years, George once spent night after night scribbling out his idea for the glide car, a frictionless, floating transport pod designed to ride above a magnetized rail system using opposing poles to reduce drag and energy output. It was crude. He used rollerblade wheels in the prototype and scavenged computer fans to simulate airflow, but the principle was clean and precise. He'd mailed it once to a local tech lab in Pasadena. They never responded. His wife Evelyn had called it a brilliant solution for a problem no one knew they had yet. That used to make him proud. Now it made him tired. The problem wasn't the idea. The problem was the years. They stacked up like junk in an attic until you didn't recognize your own house anymore. They piled on top of dreams like wet cement, hardening over time until all you could do was step around them. Evelyn was gone now. Cancer didn't ask questions. One day she was measuring a new garden bed in the backyard, and 6 months later George was staring at a hospice bed wondering what he was supposed to do with a house built for two. He hadn't touched the garden since. His daughter Lisa used to visit, used to call. Now it was emails. She lived up in Palo Alto, working for some autonomous vehicle startup with a name George couldn't remember and tech he didn't understand. They hadn't spoken properly since the argument, what was it, 7 years ago? 10. She had asked him to invest in her first company. He told her it was too risky, that she should get a real job. She said she was trying to build something. He said he already built his life and it didn't include burning cash on pipe dreams. She hung up. The call never really resumed. Every few months, a polite message, hope you're well. Every Christmas, a generic card with a company logo printed in silver foil. No photo. No phone call. He deserved it, maybe. He thought he was protecting her from disappointment. Instead, he'd just confirmed her fear, that he didn't believe in her. He knew what that felt like. Still, sometimes at night, he'd look at her old soldering kit tucked on the garage shelf. She was only 11 when he showed her how to wire an LED to a battery. The light blinked red. She clapped like it was magic. He saw it then, she had the bug. The tinkering bug. And he'd encouraged it, until life got complicated and pride got in the way. It was easier to stay quiet than say I was wrong. In the years since Evelyn passed, George had kept to routines. Not because he liked them, but because they kept the silence at bay. Monday was laundry. Tuesday was groceries. Wednesday was coffee with Joe, his old coworker, now in assisted living. Thursday was lawn day. Friday, he'd sit at the diner and read the paper. Always alone. The waitress knew his order. Scrambled eggs, wheat toast, black coffee. She called him Mr. M. He liked that. But she was young, and her kindness always had a touch of pity. That stung. The world had changed without asking him. Everything was smart now. Smart thermostats. Smart fridges. Smart toilets, for God's sake. Meanwhile, George had a rotary phone in the kitchen and still wrote checks. It wasn't that he couldn't learn. He just didn't see the point. No one was waiting on him. No one needed him to be fast or efficient or connected. He was invisible. Aging did that. Made you fade slowly until the world only saw you when you were in the way. He remembered once standing too long in front of the self-checkout screen, trying to find the bananas button. A man behind him sighed loudly and said, "Jesus, Grandpa, some of us have places to be." George didn't argue. He just left the bananas. At home, the house felt more like a museum than a home. Evelyn's teacup still sat in the glass cabinet. The calendar on the fridge was 2 years old. A few photos of Lisa in high school, a dog-eared family vacation picture from 1994, but no new memories. Just echoes. The only room untouched by dust was the garage, sealed like a tomb. Until yesterday. Until the news report. Until Elon Musk's voice, filtered through a radio segment, shook something loose in him that he didn't know was still there. "We dig tunnels," the reporter had quoted him. "Because traffic is soul-crushing. So we make new paths." Soul-crushing. That part stuck with George. Not because of traffic. Because of everything. Because retirement had promised peace and delivered isolation. Because the world didn't ask for his ideas anymore. Because the most important things he'd ever built, his inventions, his family, were now memories instead of works in progress. But what if it didn't have to be? He didn't want to be Elon Musk. He didn't even understand how Musk had become who he was. But the man didn't wait for permission. He didn't care if people thought his ideas were too big or too weird. He just kept building. And suddenly George remembered what that felt like. To believe in something so much that you didn't care if it made sense yet. Just build it. Make it real. Let the world catch up. In the quiet of the garage, George ran his fingers over the old blueprints. They were dog-eared and faded, but the lines were still straight. The math was still sound. The prototype, somewhere in the shed, probably, hadn't worked perfectly, but it had moved. It had glided, just once, on a track made from old washing machine parts. He remembered that moment. A whoop of joy. Evelyn clapping from the back door. Lisa watching wide-eyed. For one brief second, he'd touched the future. Then he'd buried it. Told himself it didn't matter. But what if it did? What if it still did? The thought terrified him. Because if it still mattered, then that meant he still mattered. And if he still mattered, then hiding behind routines and old memories wasn't survival. It was surrender. The difference between aging and disappearing was purpose. He hadn't lost his hands. Not completely. They still remembered the shape of a wrench. They still knew how to build. Maybe they didn't move as fast. Maybe they trembled sometimes. But maybe that didn't matter. Maybe this wasn't about proving he could still change the world. Maybe it was just about proving to himself that he hadn't given up. That he was still in the game. That he wasn't done. He stared at the workbench, heart thudding, blood warm in his fingertips. A strange sense of clarity rolled through him. Quiet, steady. Like the hum of an electric current. And for the first time in years, George Miller felt something he hadn't felt since before Evelyn died. Not joy. Not even hope. Just curiosity. That old, familiar whisper, what if? There was a strange kind of silence that settled over a person when they started to doubt their right to exist in the present. It wasn't loud, not like the shouts of youth, not like the slamming doors of ambition, it was a quiet erosion, the sound of meaning wearing thin. George felt it every morning when his eyes opened before the sun and there was no reason to get up except that it was what he'd always done. He felt it in the sigh of his coffee maker, in the creak of the floorboards, in the stillness of a phone that never rang. He hadn't turned on the garage light in days, not since he'd pulled out the old glide car blueprints and felt a flash of something close to daring. But the next morning, his hand trembled more than usual, and the drawer where he kept his screwdrivers wouldn't close properly. He told himself it was nothing. Still, he turned away. One part curiosity. One part fear. He was fighting something, but he couldn't quite name it yet. It wasn't Parkinson's. It wasn't age. It was something deeper. A voice that whispered, "Who do you think you are, trying to start again?" The TV blared in the background as he sat at the kitchen table, cereal going soggy in milk he didn't really want. Another news segment, this one not about tunnels or Tesla but about some young woman in her 20s building a vertical farm out of shipping containers. The host praised her visionary courage. George rolled his eyes. You get brave when your knees don't hurt, he muttered. Still, a part of him ached, not because of her success, but because he remembered that feeling. That hunger. That fire. He used to be the guy who saw possibilities in junk parts. Now he was the guy who worried about stairs. That afternoon, a letter came in the mail. Not a bill. Not junk. A card. From Lisa. Just a white envelope with her neat handwriting and a Palo Alto return address. He held it in his hand longer than he should have. Opened it slowly. Inside, a folded note on crisp stationery. No Hallmark poem, just her words. Dad, hope you're feeling okay. Saw a clip about the Boring Company's new tunnel on CNN and thought of you. It reminded me of your old sketches. Funny how the world finally caught up to your ideas. Anyway, just wanted to say hi. Love, Lisa. He stared at the last sentence. Just wanted to say hi. The word sat on his tongue like salt. His first instinct was anger. Now she remembered. After all this time. After ignoring his messages and sending sterile holiday cards. But beneath that, deeper, was guilt. He hadn't really made it easy to call. He'd never apologized. Not for the fight, not for the years of silence, not for dismissing her dreams. Just like everyone had once dismissed his. He set the card down and walked into the garage again, switching on the light. It flickered to life like an old memory trying to return. He opened the drawer that jammed and forced it closed with a sharp nudge of his hip. Then he stared at the blueprints again. Still there. Still clean. Still waiting. That night, he couldn't sleep. The thoughts in his head moved too fast, like traffic with no lanes. Was it stupid to try again? Would anyone care? What if he spent months working on this only to be laughed at, or worse, ignored entirely? What was the point of building something when the world had already passed you by? These questions were louder than the tremor. Louder than the tick of the clock on the wall. Louder even than his pride. The next morning, he went for a walk. Not his usual half-block shuffle, but a real walk. Down the street. Around the park. Past the diner where the waitress called him Mr. M. He didn't go in. Just kept walking. He passed a group of teenagers hunched over their phones. They didn't look up. He kept going. A woman walking a dog gave him a polite nod. He nodded back. No one knew what he was thinking. That he was at war with himself. That he was trying to decide if he was still someone who did things, or just someone who remembered doing them. At home, he opened his laptop. It was slow and loud, but it worked. He went to YouTube and searched Elon Musk tunnels. There were dozens of videos. Interviews. Simulations. Footage from the Las Vegas loop. He watched one where Musk said, "People assume innovation has to be young. But ideas aren't born from age, they're born from obsession." George watched it twice. Then a third time. That night, he sat at the garage workbench with a pencil in hand. His tremor was noticeable now. The lines on the paper wavered slightly. But still, he drew. He modified the old design, sharpened the magnetic alignment points, adjusted the power supply layout. For a moment, he forgot his age. Forgot the time. Forgot everything except the feel of graphite on paper and the way his mind began to hum with possibility. He didn't hear the knock on the door at first. It came again, louder. He wiped his hands and opened it. It was his neighbor, Ellen, a retired schoolteacher who sometimes brought him cookies and unsolicited life advice. She looked concerned. "George, I saw your garage light on past midnight again last night. Everything okay?" "Yeah," he said. "Just working on something." Her eyes scanned his face. "You sure you're not overdoing it? You look tired." He bristled. I'm fine. She smiled gently, the kind of smile people give when they think they know better. Just don't push too hard. You've earned the right to rest, you know. He forced a nod. Thanks, Ellen. I'll keep that in mind. But as he closed the door, he muttered, what if I don't want to rest? That was the real question, wasn't it? Was rest what you earned at the end of your life, or was it what happened when you stopped believing you had anything left to build? The next few days blurred together. He ordered parts online. Dug through old boxes for tools. Started tinkering with a small-scale model of the glide car, this time using salvaged magnets from an old microwave. He posted a sketch to an anonymous engineering forum just to see what would happen. He didn't expect a response. But someone replied. This reminds me of the early Boring Company designs. Very cool. Got more details? Just one comment. That was all it took. A tiny spark. Enough to remind him that maybe, just maybe, he still had something to contribute. But the voice inside him wasn't done yet. That old, stubborn voice. The one that said, don't get your hopes up. You're not Musk. You're not even relevant. You're a relic playing with scraps. He argued back. So what? Maybe I don't need to change the world. Maybe I just need to prove I'm still in it. The voice didn't answer. But it faded. A little. That weekend, he went to visit Joe. Assisted living smelled like Lysol and oatmeal. Joe was thinner than the last time, his hair wispy, his eyes fogged. But when George mentioned the glide car, Joe smiled. That crazy thing you used to talk about? The same, George said. I pulled it out again. Made some changes. Joe chuckled. Took Elon Musk to make you believe in your own idea again? George nodded. Yeah. Funny, huh? Not funny, Joe said. Tragic. That it took this long for you to realize you were always ahead of your time. George felt something lodge in his throat. Why didn't you tell me that back then? Joe coughed, voice thin. You wouldn't have believed me. As he left, George looked around the room. So many forgotten men sitting in wheelchairs, staring out windows, waiting. He didn't want to be one of them. Not yet. Not if there was still something to build. Still something to say. As he got back in his Buick, the tremor returned. He clenched the wheel, trying to steady his hand. But this time, he didn't curse it. Didn't hide it. He just looked at it and whispered, "You're coming with me, like it or not." He drove home, flipped on the garage light, and got back to work. Because the inner war was still raging, but now, for the first time in years, he was finally fighting back. George didn't tell anyone about the new project, not Ellen next door, not Joe at the care home, not even the waitress at the diner who always smiled and brought his coffee without asking. It wasn't secrecy exactly. It was protection. The idea was still too fresh, too delicate, like a paper boat in a storm. One careless remark, one raised eyebrow, and it might sink before it ever had a chance to float. But something had shifted. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, more like the slow thawing of a winter that had gone on too long. He started getting up before the alarm again, like he used to when he worked full-time, when the garage was a second home instead of a relic of past lives. The first bold step didn't look bold from the outside. It looked like him kneeling on a mat in the garage, prying open an old tackle box full of forgotten circuit boards and wire. But for George, that moment was revolutionary. It meant he was done waiting for someone to give him permission. He was building again. That was enough. He made a list. Not of parts or tools, but of things he had stopped doing because he believed he was too old. Sketching ideas, reaching out to Lisa, researching new tech, going to meetups, even reading popular mechanics. It was a long list. Too long. But he circled one. The blog. He used to have a small blog in the early 2000s where he wrote about car restoration and occasionally ranted about poorly designed engines. It had about 7 readers, most of them old coworkers. But the act of writing had made him feel seen. Known. Not invisible. He missed that. So he pulled out his laptop, dusted off the keyboard, and opened a blank page. He stared at it for a long time. Then he began typing. I never thought I'd still be trying to build something at 74. But here I am. The hands shake, the back complains, but the idea won't let go. It's something I sketched in 1986. I called it the glide car. Now, after seeing what Elon Musk is doing with underground tunnels, I'm starting to think I was just early, not wrong. Maybe that's true for a lot of us. Maybe we weren't wrong. Just early. He paused, reread the words, and hit publish. He didn't expect anyone to read it. That wasn't the point. The point was to say it out loud. To own the fact that he wasn't done yet. The next day, the post had 3 views. One was probably him. The other 2 were from places he didn't recognize, one from Ohio, one from somewhere in Canada. It made him smile. Someone else out there was listening. He kept writing. Every night. Short posts. Sketches. Old stories. Musings about invention, about the way the world used to build things with heart, not just profit. And each time he published, he felt a little lighter. As if the walls of the garage were expanding. As if time wasn't closing in on him but opening up. Meanwhile, the glide car was coming back to life. He rebuilt a scaled model using 3D printed components from a service Lisa had once mentioned. The first run was rough, the magnets misaligned, the model wobbling like a drunk duck on the track. But it moved. It actually moved. George let out a laugh so loud the neighbor's dog started barking. He didn't care. He set the car on the track again, adjusted the magnets, and gave it another push. It glided. Smooth. Almost weightless. Like an idea reborn. That night, George did something even bolder. He called Lisa. The phone rang 6 times before her voicemail clicked on. Her voice was crisp, professional, automated. He didn't leave a message. Just sat there, holding the phone to his ear, listening to silence. He tried again 2 days later. Same result. He told himself it was fine. She was busy. She had a life. He didn't have a right to interrupt that just because he was feeling new again. But the next morning, he posted another blog. This time he wrote to her. I saw your name on a patent once. Didn't understand half the terminology, but I printed it out and stuck it to the fridge. Your mother would have been proud. I was too. I just didn't know how to say it back then. Now I do. Lisa, if you ever read this, I believe in you. Always have. I just forgot how to show it. It felt like pouring truth onto the page. Uncomfortable. Raw. But necessary. Like clearing out a wound so it could heal. 3 days later, the blog got a comment. Just one sentence, I remember watching you build that in the garage. I thought it was magic. Lisa. No sign-off, no emojis, no calls. But it was her. He read the sentence 5 times, then 10. Then he cried, quietly, in the dark, the way men of his generation do when they don't know what else to do with gratitude. The glide car prototype kept improving. He started filming short clips and uploading them to YouTube. Shaky hands, cluttered background, no music, just a 74-year-old man talking about magnetic repulsion and urban mobility. The first video had 14 views. Then 23. Then 104. He laughed when he hit 300. He wasn't going viral. But he was connecting. One of the comments read, "My dad's 68 and still builds in his shed." This reminds me of him. Subscribed. Another said, "Sir, you're a badass. Keep building." The word stirred something in him he hadn't felt since his first invention had gotten a mention in the local paper decades ago. Not pride. Not fame. Belonging. He was part of something again. He was no longer just an observer of progress. He was a contributor. A voice. Even if it shook. Then one morning, as he was adjusting the suspension system on the prototype, Ellen knocked again. This time, she didn't come with cookies. She held a piece of paper. "You've been busy," she said. He looked at the paper. It was a printout of his blog. "I found this through a friend." She shared it on Facebook. George felt his face flush. "You read it?" "I did," she said. "It's beautiful. And brave. It's just a blog." "No," she said firmly. "It's a wake-up call. For a lot of us." She paused. "I've been sitting on a manuscript for 12 years. A novel. I told myself I was too old to publish. But after reading what you wrote," she didn't finish. She didn't have to. They just looked at each other for a moment, two neighbors suddenly seeing each other as whole people, not just roles, retired auto guy and former schoolteacher. "We're not done yet," she said, smiling. "Not even close," he replied. After she left, he stood at the edge of the garage and looked around. Nothing had changed. And yet everything had. Because one thing, just one thing, had shifted. Not the prototype. Not the blog. Not even Lisa's comment. It was him. He had changed. He had made a choice. A choice to stop waiting. A choice to start building again. That was the real breakthrough. The spark that lit the fuse. And like a tunnel burrowed under a traffic jam, it didn't remove all the obstacles, but it created a way through. A way forward. That night, he posted one last line on the blog before bed. Sometimes the smallest change, picking up a pencil, making a call, hitting publish, is the biggest act of rebellion against fading away. The next morning, his blog had 2,000 views. It happened on a Wednesday morning, the kind of morning George would have forgotten in any other year, overcast and quiet, with the usual breeze that carried the scent of distant cut grass and tired pavement. He had just finished tightening the last screw on version 7 of the glide car prototype, the one with improved lateral stability and a smaller, cleaner electromagnetic array. His fingers ached from the work, not with the sharpness of injury but the dull warning of old bones trying to keep up with a younger mind. Still, he kept going. Because something was different now. He wanted to keep going. Not out of routine. Not out of boredom. But out of something resembling joy. The night before, he'd published a blog post titled, "You're Not Done Yet, and Neither Am I." He'd written it in one sitting, sweat beading at his brow, chest tight, because it felt like peeling his heart open and laying it on a steel table. He wrote about Evelyn. About Lisa. About the invention he buried for 3 decades. He wrote about how he let silence fill the space between his daughter and himself until it almost became permanent. But he also wrote about the choice to build again. How Elon Musk's tunnel project, however ambitious or absurd it seemed to the outside world, wasn't just about traffic or technology. It was about making new paths when the old ones were too broken to fix. The post had gone out at 10:14 p.m. By the time he woke up, it had been shared over 800 times. And in his inbox, under a subject line that simply read, "Your post," there was a message. It was from Lisa. He opened it with trembling hands, unsure if he should brace for cold formality or worse, anger. But what he saw were 5 words that took the air right out of his lungs. "I read it. I cried." That was it. No explanations. No lecture. But the wall that had stood between them for years, it cracked. And through that small crack, something began to rise. George stood at the prototype table, hand hovering above the switch, and felt everything hit him all at once. Every failure. Every memory. Every sleepless night where he'd convinced himself that starting over was just for young people. And yet, here he was. Heart thudding. Knees shaky. About to test a magnetic transport model he'd dreamed of back when gas was 89 cents a gallon. He flipped the switch. The coil hummed to life, faint but real, and the track glowed under the car. The model lifted, just slightly, just enough. He gave it a gentle nudge, and it moved. Not flawlessly. Not fast. But it glided. No friction. No resistance. Just potential. He laughed, not out of pride but disbelief. Like someone who'd struck a match in the dark and discovered the walls were made of mirrors. This wasn't just about engineering anymore. It was about reclaiming the part of himself he'd long buried under the rubble of lost years. He filmed the test run and uploaded the video with the caption, "Sometimes it just takes one push." 3 days later, the video had 20,000 views. It wasn't viral by internet standards, but to George, it was an avalanche. Comments poured in. A man from Michigan said he used to design prototypes but gave up after his wife passed. Now he was pulling his sketchbooks out again. A woman from Texas said her father was 80 and watching George's videos with a spark she hadn't seen in years. One comment simply read, "You remind me that it's not too late to matter." George read them all. Every single one. And in doing so, he realized something profound. The project, the invention, the blog, it wasn't just a comeback story. It was a signal flare. A quiet rebellion against the idea that life's purpose had an expiration date. And it was being heard. Lisa called a week later. No email. No preamble. Just his phone ringing in the middle of the afternoon. He almost didn't answer. His hands froze above the receiver. He hadn't heard her voice live in nearly 9 years. "Hi, Dad," she said. Just those 2 words. He swallowed, throat suddenly dry. "Hey, sweetheart." Silence followed, heavy, full of things unsaid. Then she laughed softly. "You've got fans now, huh?" He chuckled. "So it seems." "I've read every post," she said. "I've watched every video. Even the shaky ones." "They're all shaky," he said. "That's what makes them real," she replied. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the light fixture above. "I'm sorry, Lisa. For everything. For the silence. For doubting you. For not saying what I should've when you needed me to." Another pause. Then she said, "I know. I was angry for a long time. But I never stopped checking your blog. Never stopped wondering what you were doing in that garage. Mostly gathering dust," he said. "Until now." Her voice softened. "I'd like to come visit. If that's okay." He blinked hard. "Yeah," he said, voice breaking. "Yeah, I'd like that very much." She arrived the following weekend. They didn't talk about the past right away. They didn't have to. It lived in the quiet looks, the hesitant smiles, the way she lingered in the garage as he showed her the glide car like it was a newborn. She asked questions. Smart ones. Detailed ones. The kind he used to get excited about when she was little. She wasn't just humoring him. She was engaging. Collaborating. For the first time in years, they were building something together. The emotional breakthrough came that night, in the backyard, under the porch light Evelyn had insisted on installing for ambience. Lisa held a mug of tea. George stared at the stars. "I used to think it was over," he said. "That I missed my window." She didn't look at him. Just sipped her tea. "And now?" He exhaled slowly. "Now I think the window was always there." I just needed to stop waiting for someone else to open it. She nodded. You know, when I watched that first test video, I started crying at the part where the model wobbled. He laughed. That's when most people stopped watching. Not me, she said. Because it wasn't perfect. But it moved. That's what hit me. You kept going even though it wasn't perfect. They sat in silence for a while. The good kind. The kind that only exists when people have finally said what needed to be said. After she went to bed, George stayed up a little longer. He walked into the garage, touched the edge of the prototype, and whispered, "We did it, kid." Not to himself. To the idea. To the version of him that never stopped believing, even when the rest of him did. A few days later, a local news station picked up his blog story. Then a tech podcast reached out. Then a retired NASA engineer commented on his video offering design suggestions. The momentum wasn't explosive. It was steady. Real. Like something finally clicking into place after years of silence. And as the attention grew, George didn't feel overwhelmed. He felt seen. Not as a grandfather. Not as a retiree. But as a builder. An innovator. A man who, at 74, had broken through the most invisible wall of all, the one in his own mind that whispered, "You're too late." Because now, he knew better. You're never too late to light the fuse. You're never too old to change direction. And sometimes, all it takes is one push to glide. It wasn't fame that changed George's life. It wasn't the followers or the podcast interviews or the calls from strangers who wanted to shake his hand or license his design. No, the real shift was something slower, quieter, and far more sacred. It was the morning he woke up and didn't dread the mirror. The moment he stood in his garage, not as an old man clinging to the past, but as a creator standing inside a dream he had finally brought to life. It was the moment he stopped apologizing for still being here. The news coverage had started modest, just a short segment on a local station highlighting a retired engineer with a dream. The footage was grainy but honest, George in his garage, explaining the glide car like it was the first time he'd ever shared it with the world. He didn't clean up the space or hide the tremor in his voice. He just told the truth. I buried this idea for decades, he'd said to the camera. Not because it didn't work, but because I stopped believing that I worked. That I mattered. But it never stopped calling to me. And if you're lucky, an idea like that will wait for you to come back. That line got quoted. People shared it. Someone from a startup in Seattle posted it with the caption, "This man is more visionary at 74 than half of Silicon Valley at 40. But George didn't care about virality. He didn't even understand half the platforms people were tagging him on. What mattered to him was the email from a high school physics teacher in Kansas who told him that her students were building their own version of the glide car for their senior project. What mattered was the video call he had with an old Navy buddy who said, 'You've made me want to get out of the recliner and back in the workshop.' And most of all, what mattered was Lisa. She stayed longer than planned. What was supposed to be a weekend turned into a week, and then two. She cleared out the guest bedroom, set up a temporary home office at the kitchen table, and started asking George if she could help film his tutorials. "You talk too fast when you explain the coil systems," she told him one night. "Let me help you slow it down so people don't miss the magic." He smiled at the word, magic. That was what he'd forgotten over the years. The magic. Not the wires or the math. But the way building something could make you feel like time didn't own you anymore. Like you were part of something bigger than your body. Bigger than your age. Together, they began to organize the footage. Lisa edited the clips, cleaned up the audio, and posted to a channel she branded Glide Again. George rolled his eyes at the name but secretly loved it. The first official video had 12,000 views in 3 days. Then 40,000. By the end of the month, their most popular upload, a 3-part explanation of magnetic repulsion theory using household items, crossed 100,000. Comments poured in from people of every age, students, teachers, hobbyists, veterans, widows, young inventors, old dreamers. One man wrote, "I lost my job at 63. Thought I was useless. Found your channel. Built your demo model. Sold my first prototype last week. Thank you for reminding me I'm not done yet." George printed that one and stuck it on the garage wall, right next to Lisa's patent. It wasn't about validation anymore. It was about connection. He had once believed legacy was a finished thing, a building, a name carved into a plaque, a perfect invention launched before the bones got too brittle to matter. But now he saw it differently. Legacy wasn't what you left behind. It was what you left in motion. It was the spark that passed from one hand to another, from one trembling voice to a listening soul. It was continuity. One morning, about 5 weeks after Lisa had moved in, George received a letter. A real one. Paper. Envelope. No stamp. Hand-delivered by a courier. It came from the Boring Company. The letter was brief. It thanked him for his contributions to the future of transportation, acknowledged the influence of his design on a current engineering team, and, most surprising of all, included an invitation to visit one of the tunnel sites. The signature at the bottom was a digital one, but unmistakable. Elon Musk. George stared at the letter, not moving. Not breathing. Lisa peeked over his shoulder. "Dad," she whispered, "you're going to meet him." "I don't need to meet him," George said softly. "I just needed him to remind me it was okay to still believe." But 2 weeks later, he found himself standing at the edge of a Boring Company tunnel site in Nevada, safety vest over his shirt, hard hat slightly too big for his thinning hair. The sun was brutal, but the excitement pulsing through him made him forget the heat. Elon didn't appear immediately. A young engineer greeted George and led him down a narrow corridor toward a command room. Screens everywhere. Data streams. Real-time tunneling visuals. George could barely take it all in. And then, suddenly, there he was. Elon. Taller than expected. Sleeves rolled. Not formal. Just present. Focused. "Mr. Martin," Elon said, extending a hand. "I've read every blog post. The glide car concept, wildly elegant. I love it." George's hand trembled as they shook, but he stood tall. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Elon smiled. "No. Thank you. Most people stop inventing when the world stops watching. But you proved that creation doesn't expire with age." They talked for nearly an hour. About magnets, tunnels, hope, energy. But beneath the technical jargon was something else, a shared refusal to accept the ordinary. Before George left, Elon said, "You should see the test track. I think you'll recognize a few ideas." And he did. Small touches. Familiar tweaks. Echoes of the glide car concept reflected in cutting-edge systems. His idea, his legacy, was living on, reshaped, refined, but rooted in the vision he once sketched on napkins and scrap paper in a dusty garage. On the flight home, George didn't sleep. He stared out the window, sky humming outside, heart full. Lisa sat beside him, scrolling through photos of the trip. She leaned over. "So," she said, "what now?" George turned to her, eyes clear. "Now," he said, "we teach." The next 6 months were a blur of action. George launched a mentoring group online for older inventors. He called it Second Spark. People joined from all over the country, retired machinists, former teachers, single moms with welding skills, grandfathers with notebooks full of dreams. Lisa helped organize webinars. They posted design challenges, built models, even sent out starter kits with magnets and rails. They weren't just tinkering. They were building a movement. The glide car. That became a symbol. Not of speed. Not of tech. But of return. Of the moment a person turns back toward the thing they loved, and dares to love it again. One night, as George sat in the garage, watching version 11 glide smooth and steady across a test track, Lisa came in with 2 mugs of cocoa. "Feels like Mom's still here," she said. George nodded. "She'd be proud of you," Lisa added. "Of us," George corrected. They sat there in silence, watching the small car make its slow, flawless journey across the table. And in that moment, George realized something. The garage wasn't just a room. It was a cathedral. A place where past and present converged, where grief made room for hope, where age didn't dim the light, it focused it. And his legacy? It wasn't a tunnel through earth. It was a tunnel through doubt. Through fear. Through silence. He had dug deep. And on the other side, he hadn't found fame. He'd found himself. He smiled, eyes glassy, and whispered, "It was never too late. It just wasn't time, until now." The first package came from Montana. A plain cardboard box, no return address, but when George opened it on the kitchen table, he found something that made his chest tighten in a way he hadn't expected. Inside was a crude model, wooden, shaky, made from old drawer runners and refrigerator magnets, along with a letter. Handwritten. "Mr. Martin, my grandson showed me your YouTube video. I'm 82. Used to be a machine tech before the arthritis came. Built this over the weekend. Hurts like hell to saw these days, but it felt good to make something again. Real good. Thought you should see it. Thanks for lighting the fire." George didn't know what to say. He just stared at the letter, then the model, then the letter again, heart pounding not from excitement, but reverence. This was no fan mail. This was legacy made tangible. The next package came a few days later. Then another. Models. Letters. Photos of people working in sheds, garages, on porches with folding tables. Some were beautifully engineered. Others looked barely held together. But each one was alive. Carried a heartbeat. Some came with stories, like the woman in Arkansas who used to restore clocks before her husband passed, and now spent afternoons teaching her grandkids how to use magnets. Or the Vietnam vet who hadn't picked up a wrench in 20 years but built a levitating model for his great-granddaughter's science fair. The mail kept coming. George set up a shelf in the garage for all of them. He called it the Wall of Spark. Lisa made little placards with their names and states. They ran out of room in 2 weeks. That's when George knew it was time for the next phase. "We need to take this on the road," he said one night, standing in the garage, holding a photo sent in by a retired blacksmith from South Dakota. Lisa arched an eyebrow. "Like a tour?" "Like a movement," he said. "There are too many people out there thinking it's too late. We show them it's not." Within a month, they'd rented an old RV, gutted the back to install a mobile workbench, painted the sides with bold, blocky letters, "Glide Again, the Second Spark Tour." George was nervous at first. It had been years since he'd driven more than 30 miles. But as the tires rolled over highways, county roads, and through rusted towns and sprawling suburbs, something awoke in him. He wasn't chasing youth. He was honoring age. Their first stop was a senior center in Missouri. George expected a quiet room of 5 or 6 attendees. Instead, the rec hall was packed. 50 chairs, all full. Some brought their own sketches. Some brought grandkids. George stood at the front, voice cracking as he began. "I spent a long time thinking life had passed me by. Then one day I decided to build again. Not because I knew how it would turn out. But because I had to remember who I was." He showed them the glide car. Passed around the 3D, printed parts. Let one woman with Parkinson's touch the rail and feel the magnetic pull as it floated. She cried. So did George. You don't need permission to keep dreaming, he told them. You just need one small spark. That's all it takes. The tour took them through 9 states in 6 weeks. Community centers, libraries, backyards. Each stop was different, but the story was the same, people showing up with dusty dreams, long-silenced hopes, and the quiet thrill of believing again. They met a retired aerospace engineer in New Mexico who had built a working drone from salvaged parts but never showed anyone. They met a former truck driver in Oklahoma who turned an old semi-trailer into a mobile machine shop. George hugged every one of them. Encouraged every design. Listened to every story. Because he understood now, his story was no longer his own. It belonged to everyone who had ever wondered, is it too late? In Iowa, a teenage girl approached him after a workshop. My grandpa used to invent stuff, she said. But he gave it up after Grandma died. I showed him your video. Now he's out in the garage again. I haven't seen him smile like that in years. George knelt to meet her eyes. Tell him I said welcome back. She nodded, tears in her eyes. In every stop, Lisa filmed, edited, posted. Their audience grew, tens of thousands. Then hundreds. Then a segment on national television. By then, George didn't flinch when cameras were around. He wasn't performing. He was witnessing. Affirming. Reminding people what they still carried. In one of the final stops, a man named Ray pulled George aside after the workshop. I've got something to show you, he said. George followed him to a truck parked under an old oak. Ray opened the tailgate and revealed a dusty blueprint. This was my dream, he said. Portable desalination pump. Cheap. Clean. Runs on solar. Never finished it. Kids told me it was too late. George studied the plans. Ray, he said, these are brilliant. Ray shrugged. Don't have the hands I used to. But you've got the mind, George said. That's all we need. That night, George posted a picture of Ray's blueprint with a caption that read, Dreams don't rust. They wait. The post went viral. 2 weeks later, a nonprofit reached out asking to fund Ray's prototype. That's when Lisa finally said it out loud. Dad, I think you've built something bigger than a car. He looked at her, eyes glassy. No, he said. We did. The tour wrapped, and they returned home to find boxes stacked on the porch. More letters. More models. A letter from a 91-year-old woman who had rebuilt a glider she designed in college. A painting from a man who hadn't picked up a brush since the 80s. A note from a boy in Alaska, when I grow up, I want to be like George. George cried reading that one. Ugly, grateful tears. Because he remembered the day he almost sold the house. The day he stood in the garage and thought, what's the point? And now, he was the point. Not because he was special. But because he kept going. Because he dared to answer the spark. He stood again in that garage one afternoon, running his hand along the workbench. Lisa was on a call, scheduling a new series of Second Spark virtual build-alongs. Outside, a neighbor walked by and waved. George waved back, then whispered, "Thank you, Evelyn," to no one in particular. Because he knew she was still with him, in the light, in the sound of the tools, in Lisa's laugh, in every letter from someone daring to begin again. That was his legacy. Not the invention. But the invitation. To remember. To return. To rebuild. Not because time was kind. But because hope was stronger. He picked up the glide car model, now worn from travel, and set it on the rail. Watched it float, steady and sure. Then, without ceremony or hesitation, he gave it a gentle push. George never imagined that his small garage project would reach so far. The second spark movement was no longer just a collection of dreams rekindled. It was becoming a beacon of change for those long convinced their time had passed. One afternoon, while tinkering with the glide car's newest iteration, George's phone buzzed with a video call from a young man named Marcus, a software engineer living in Austin, Texas. Marcus had stumbled across George's channel through a friend's recommendation and was now leading a small team building a magnetic levitation bike inspired by George's work. His excitement was contagious. "Mr. Martin," Marcus began, voice warm with admiration, "your story lit a fire in me and the team. We're working on integrating some of your coil designs with AI to optimize balance and energy use. Would you be interested in collaborating?" George leaned back, feeling the familiar thrill of possibility pulse through him. He remembered the days when such conversations felt like distant dreams, reserved for younger, faster minds. But here was an invitation. An echo of innovation bridging generations. Over the next few weeks, George and Marcus exchanged ideas, plans, and prototypes. The age gap melted away in shared passion. George marveled at the sleek tech Marcus and his team brought to the table, while Marcus soaked in George's experience, wisdom, and creative grit. Their conversations often drifted beyond circuits and coils, touching on fears, failures, and the delicate balance of chasing dreams while embracing reality. It was a partnership built on respect, curiosity, and hope. Meanwhile, back home, Lisa was hard at work curating a new series of live workshops aimed at older inventors. They called it the Echo Lab. The idea was simple: create a virtual space where veterans, retirees, hobbyists, and late bloomers could gather, share, and build together, no matter where they lived. The response was overwhelming. Participants logged in from Florida to Alaska, California to Maine, some connecting from assisted living facilities, others from basements and garages. George marveled at the resilience, the enthusiasm, the way these creators refused to be defined by their age or circumstance. One evening, during a live session, a participant named Evelyn shared a story that left everyone breathless. She was an 88-year-old woman who had been a textile engineer but had abandoned her passion after her husband passed. Now, inspired by the community, she was designing an innovative, ergonomic loom to make weaving accessible to people with arthritis. The room flooded with encouragement, technical suggestions, and offers to help source materials. For George, moments like that made every late night, every setback, every doubt worth it. His legacy wasn't a single invention but a movement, a network of creators proving that age was not a barrier but a badge of honor. In the midst of this surge, George received an unexpected invitation, a speaking engagement at a major technology conference in San Francisco. It was a high-profile event dominated by the latest startups, AI breakthroughs, and cutting-edge robotics. George, with his gentle manner and vintage ideas, felt like a fish out of water. But Lisa insisted. "You've earned this," she said, packing his bags. "They need to hear your story." On stage, under blinding lights and before an audience of tech elites, George began simply. "I'm not here to talk about the newest app or AI algorithm. I'm here to remind you that innovation is timeless." He shared his journey, the doubts, the losses, the rebirth sparked by a simple garage project. He showed clips from Second Spark and Echo Lab, spotlighting participants who had reignited their dreams. The crowd listened, some skeptical, many moved. George's words weren't polished, but they were real. They reminded everyone present that technology was only part of the equation. Heart, perseverance, and the courage to begin again were just as crucial. After his talk, several young entrepreneurs approached George, eager to learn from him, partner with him, and contribute to the growing community. One was a venture capitalist who wanted to fund a new accelerator focused on late-stage inventors. Another was a robotics engineer interested in adapting glide car technology for urban mobility. For the first time in years, George saw a horizon filled with possibility. He was no longer the forgotten retiree but a vital link between past and future. When he returned home, the messages kept coming, invitations, collaborations, friendships forming across time zones. One letter stood out. It was from a young woman named Maya, a first-generation college student who credited George's story for inspiring her to pursue engineering despite doubts from family and friends. "Your journey showed me that it's never too late to chase a dream," she wrote. "And sometimes, it's never too early to believe in someone's." George shared the letter with Lisa, and together they realized that Second Spark was growing beyond their initial vision. It was no longer just a movement for seniors but a bridge connecting all generations through shared creativity and resilience. One crisp autumn evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, George sat on the porch with Lisa, sipping tea. They watched the sky turn shades of amber and violet, the air thick with the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. "You've done more than I ever dreamed," George said softly. Lisa smiled, squeezing his hand. "We've done it together." The journey was far from over. But in that moment, George felt a profound peace. He wasn't racing against time. He was dancing with it, every step a new possibility, every breath a testament to the power of belief. Outside, the glide car sat on the workbench, ready for its next voyage, a symbol not just of what had been created, but what was yet to come. Because the greatest invention of all, George realized, was not the technology. It was the enduring human spirit, the spark that refuses to die, no matter the years. And as long as that spark burned, the future was limitless. George woke to the creaking house and the steady hum of morning light slipping through the cracked blinds. His joints protested with every move, the stiffness a reminder of years etched deep into his bones. For a moment, he lay still, the familiar ache settling over him like a heavy blanket. Aging wasn't just a number, it was a physical landscape he was learning to navigate anew. He thought about the countless nights he spent in this very bed, wrestling with doubts, loneliness, and the gnawing fear that time was slipping through his fingers faster than he could hold on. Yet today felt different. Today carried a quiet resolve, something Musk had said in an interview replaying in George's mind: "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." It was a mantra George had pinned on his workshop wall, a constant challenge to himself. But the shadows were real. Some days, the pain and fatigue threatened to drown the light. The doctors had warned him again last week: "Take it slow, George. Your heart, your knees, you're not as young as you were." The word "slow" felt like a slow death sentence. But giving up was never an option. So George pushed on. He forced his aching legs to carry him to the garage, to the workbench where the glide car rested. Today, he was determined to try a new magnet configuration. Lisa's voice crackled over the phone as she checked in. "Dad, remember to pace yourself. Don't overdo it." He smiled, the warmth of her care wrapping around him like a shield. "I know, Lisa. But this matters." He could hear the echo of Elon's own battles, relentless iterations, setbacks, public criticism. George had learned that failure wasn't the end but a necessary step forward. Still, it was lonely. Especially when old friends faded away, when neighbors looked past him like he was invisible, when his own body felt like a stranger. One afternoon, as he sat on the porch nursing a hot cup of tea, his neighbor Evelyn stopped by with a freshly baked apple pie. They shared stories, laughter breaking through the quiet like sun through clouds. Evelyn, too, carried scars of loss and disappointment. But they found solace in shared resilience, a reminder that connection was part of healing. That evening, George recorded a new video, his hands trembling slightly as he held the glide car. "Some days, the weight of years feels unbearable," he said, voice raw but steady. "But every day is a chance to build, to create, to believe." Elon Musk once said, "Persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up." I'm not giving up. The video resonated far beyond his expectations. Messages poured in, people sharing their own battles with health, loneliness, and fear. George realized he wasn't alone in facing shadows. The community they built was a lifeline, a testament that hope could flourish even in the darkest corners. One message came from a woman named Ruth, who had battled cancer and now struggled with mobility. She wrote, "Watching you keeps me fighting. Your courage gives me strength when I feel weak." That night, George stared out at the stars, feeling the fragile thread of life weaving him into something larger. He understood that aging meant vulnerability, yes, but also the profound power of choosing to fight. Elon's voice echoed again, "Some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster." For George, the alternative was giving in to despair. He wasn't ready. He wouldn't be. With renewed determination, George adjusted the glide car's design, testing new configurations with a patience born from years of practice and grit. The road ahead was uncertain, but as he leaned into the challenge, he found a strange joy in the struggle, the kind that Musk himself had spoken about. It wasn't about the destination, it was about the relentless pursuit, the refusal to be defined by age or circumstance. That night, Lisa surprised him by setting up a small workshop space in the living room, complete with ergonomic tools and better lighting. "You don't have to do this alone," she said softly. George nodded, grateful for the support that buoyed his spirit. The future was still unwritten, and though shadows lingered, he was learning to face them with courage, one small step at a time. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For weeks, George had been wrestling with the same stubborn problem. The glide car's magnetic levitation system was unstable under certain speeds, causing the model to wobble and stall. Frustration gnawed at him. He had pored over diagrams, tinkered with coil arrangements, and tested different power sources, but the solution remained elusive. Each failure chipped away at his confidence, reminding him of the limits his aging body and mind sometimes imposed. But Elon Musk's words kept echoing in his mind, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." George wasn't ready to give up. One crisp morning, he sat in his garage, sunlight filtering through dusty windows, the scent of motor oil and aged wood thick in the air. The glide car rested on the workbench, its components scattered around like a puzzle waiting to be solved. His hands, rough and scarred from years of work, moved with steady determination. He adjusted a coil, then another, running calculations on an old tablet. Suddenly, a thought struck him: why not look beyond traditional methods? Elon's ventures into electric cars, rockets, and tunneling had all involved challenging conventions. George grabbed a notebook and began sketching a new hybrid design, incorporating a stabilizing gyroscope to counteract the wobble. It was risky, untested, and complicated, but it was also bold. The next few days were a blur of trial and error. George lost count of how many times he disassembled and rebuilt the model. His joints ached, his eyes strained, but he was relentless. Lisa brought him coffee and meals, her presence a quiet encouragement. "You're onto something, Dad," she said one evening, watching him work by lamplight. "I can feel it." On the seventh day, George stood back and held his breath. He placed the glide car on the rail, flipped the switch, and watched. The model lifted smoothly, glided steadily, and maintained perfect balance. He couldn't believe it. It was a breakthrough. He laughed, a deep, full laugh that echoed through the garage like a triumphant bell. The weeks that followed were filled with excitement and purpose. George documented the new design, sharing videos and blueprints with the Second Spark community. Inventors from around the country began experimenting with the hybrid system, adapting it for their own projects. The ripple effect was undeniable. At a local makerspace event, George demonstrated the improved glide car to a group of eager inventors, ranging from teenagers to fellow seniors. The energy in the room was electric. Someone shouted, "You're not just building a car, you're building hope." George felt a lump rise in his throat. Hope, that fragile, powerful force that had carried him through loneliness, doubt, and pain. The breakthrough wasn't just technical, it was deeply personal. It was proof that age could be a strength, that persistence paid off, that the fire Musk had sparked inside him was real and alive. One evening, as George prepared for a live stream Q&A, a familiar notification popped up on his phone. It was an invitation from a major innovation magazine to feature the Glide car in their upcoming issue. The headline? How One Man's Relentless Spirit is Changing the Way We Think About Aging and Innovation. George stared at the message, heart pounding. This was more than recognition, it was validation of every struggle, every step forward. As the live stream began, George shared not just the technical details but the story behind the invention, the doubts, the losses, the victories. Viewers flooded the chat with messages of encouragement and gratitude. Among the comments was one that stood out: "Your story reminds me of Elon Musk's fail fast, fail often mantra. Thanks for showing us it's never too late to keep trying." George smiled, feeling the weight of the journey settle into a quiet strength. He knew the path ahead would still have challenges. Aging would bring new obstacles, the world would keep changing, but the breakthrough proved one thing beyond doubt: he still had more to give, more to build, more to inspire. That night, as he lay in bed, George whispered a simple truth to the dark room: "I'm not done yet." George had never imagined that his passion project would become a bridge, linking not just ideas and inventions but lives, hopes, and dreams across generations. After the breakthrough with the Glide car, the momentum carried him far beyond his small garage in the Midwest. Invitations arrived from schools, community centers, and youth clubs eager to hear his story and share in his inventions. One such invitation came from a local high school where the robotics team was struggling to find inspiration and direction. When George walked into the brightly lit workshop, the air buzzed with a mixture of excitement and nervous energy. The students, some shy, some brimming with enthusiasm, looked up at the older man who seemed to carry a world of experience in his gentle eyes. "I've been exactly where you are," George began, his voice steady. "Unsure if my ideas mattered. But let me tell you, it's never too late to start, and it's never too early to believe in your dreams." The students leaned in as George shared his journey, the setbacks, the late nights, the breakthrough sparked by a mindset shared by Elon Musk, relentless curiosity and refusal to accept limits. He demonstrated the Glide car's latest model, showing how perseverance and innovation could change the game. A young girl named Ava approached after the presentation, eyes bright with questions. She was passionate about engineering but doubted her ability to make a difference. "How do you keep going when it feels like the world's moving too fast?" she asked. George smiled, recalling his own moments of doubt. "You focus on what matters. You break big problems into small steps and celebrate each victory, no matter how tiny. Remember, even Elon Musk started with one idea, one step at a time." Over the following weeks, George and Ava formed an unlikely mentorship. They exchanged ideas, built prototypes, and brainstormed solutions. Ava's youthful energy complemented George's seasoned wisdom, creating a synergy that fueled both their spirits. The robotics team began incorporating Glide car technology into their projects, adapting magnetic levitation for competition challenges. Meanwhile, Second Spark continued to evolve. Lisa's workshops flourished, attracting not just seniors but curious minds of all ages. The community became a vibrant tapestry of shared stories, mutual respect, and collaborative invention. George's presence at the school rekindled his sense of purpose beyond his inventions. He realized that legacy wasn't just about what you build but who you inspire. One day, as he prepared for another workshop, he received a message from Maya, the young engineering student who had once written to him, saying his story changed her path. Maya was now leading a team developing sustainable energy solutions and wanted to invite George to speak at her university. "Your journey gave me the courage to dream big," she wrote. "Now I want to pay it forward." George felt a surge of pride and humility. He was no longer just the man in the garage, he was part of a growing movement, one where age, experience, and youth combined to forge new possibilities. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, George sat with Lisa on the porch, watching the sky fade to twilight. "It's amazing," he said softly, "how connection can spark more than invention. How sharing a story can light the way for someone else." Lisa nodded, squeezing his hand. "You've built more than a car. You've built bridges." In the quiet that followed, George thought about the future. There would be challenges, sure, physical limits, societal doubts, moments of loneliness. But now he knew he wasn't alone. The bridges they built could carry dreams across any divide, age, fear, or doubt. Inspired by Elon Musk's relentless pursuit of the impossible, George embraced the new chapter of his life with open arms. It wasn't just about creating, it was about inspiring, mentoring, and lifting others as he climbed. The echoes of his journey were becoming a chorus, a call to action for anyone who had ever felt too old, too tired, or too invisible. And for George, that was the greatest breakthrough of all. The storm arrived suddenly that afternoon, dark clouds rolling over the small town with a low rumble that seemed to shake the very air. George had been working late in his garage, fine-tuning the glide car's energy system when the first gust of wind rattled the windows. He barely noticed until a flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed by a crack that made his heart skip. The power surged, flickered, then died, plunging the workshop into shadow. George reached for his flashlight, the beam cutting through dust motes like tiny stars. As he moved to secure the fragile electronics, a loud crash echoed behind him. Turning sharply, he saw the prototype he'd been so proud of, parts scattered across the floor, wires tangled, and the delicate coil shattered. The weight of years pressed down on him as he sank to his knees, staring at the broken pieces. This wasn't just a machine. It was months of work, of hope, of proof that progress was possible. For a moment, despair threatened to swallow him whole. The room felt cold and empty, the silence after the storm deafening. But then, somewhere deep inside, a flicker of something stronger stirred. Elon Musk's words echoed in his mind, "Failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough." George took a deep breath, steadying his shaking hands. This setback, painful as it was not the end. It was part of the process. He reached for the broken coil, turning it over with care. The damage was extensive but not irreparable. If he could rebuild, reimagine the design, there was still a chance. The next days tested George's resolve like never before. His body ached more, his energy waned, but his mind raced with new ideas. Lisa insisted on helping, organizing his workspace and making sure he took breaks. She reminded him that setbacks were part of every great journey. "Remember Elon's resilience," she said gently. "It's not about how hard you fall, but how you get back up." Friends and community members reached out, offering parts, tools, and encouragement. The online forums buzzed with messages, "We believe in you. Take your time, we're here." This support was a balm for George's weary spirit. Slowly, he began to rebuild. Each coil he rewound, each wire soldered, was an act of defiance against despair. It was a reminder that age was not a prison but a proving ground for strength. The process was painstaking, and progress felt slow. Some nights, George lay awake, haunted by doubts and fears. Could he really finish? Was his body strong enough to endure the fight? But then a new thought took hold, a lesson from Musk's relentless innovation: persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up. George wasn't ready to surrender. One afternoon, as he worked, the power flickered back on, the storm passing but leaving traces of damage outside. The birds began to sing again, a gentle reminder of renewal. That evening, George invited a few members of the Second Spark community to a live video chat. His hands were still trembling slightly, but his voice carried a quiet determination. "Setbacks will come. They test us, challenge us, sometimes break us down," he said. But they also give us the chance to rebuild stronger, smarter, and more resilient. If Elon Musk's story teaches us anything, it's that failure isn't defeat, it's a step on the path to success. The chat was filled with messages of solidarity, stories of personal storms weathered, and the shared commitment to rise again. For George, this moment was transformative. He was not alone in facing life's tempests. Together, they could weather any storm. Over the following weeks, the rebuilt glide car took shape, better than before. George incorporated new safety features and design improvements born from the hard lessons of failure. The process renewed his faith not just in his invention but in himself. One evening, as he and Lisa sat watching the sunset, George reflected aloud, "It's strange, sometimes the darkest storms bring the brightest dawns." Lisa smiled, knowing that the man she loved had grown stronger, not in spite of his challenges, but because of them. The journey ahead remained uncertain, filled with new obstacles and unknowns. But George faced it with a steadiness forged in fire, a heart fueled by purpose, and a mind sharpened by experience. The storm had tested him, but it had not broken him. And that was the true breakthrough. The morning sun spilled golden light over the quiet streets of George's town, painting everything in hues of promise. After the storm and the long nights of rebuilding, a new sense of calm settled over him, calm, but not complacent. His breakthrough with the glide car had sparked more than just innovation, it had ignited a movement. George realized the next step was no longer just about his own projects or struggles, it was about reaching further, lifting others, and shaping a future where age was no barrier to dreams. That week, the community center buzzed with activity as George prepared to lead a workshop titled Innovation at Any Age. Tables were scattered with parts, tools, and half-finished prototypes. Participants ranged widely, from eager teenagers testing ideas, to seniors rediscovering their creative spark. The room felt alive with possibility. George looked around, heart swelling with pride and hope. He thought of Elon Musk's words, "Some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster." Here, embracing change meant welcoming new ideas, perspectives, and collaboration. It was about breaking down the walls society often built between generations and limitations. During the workshop, George shared his story, the struggles, the breakthrough, the storm, and the steadfastness that followed. But more importantly, he listened. He listened to stories of dreams deferred, fears of irrelevance, and the hunger to contribute. Among the attendees was Tom, a retired mechanic with hands as skilled as any craftsman, who had always dreamed of designing sustainable engines but felt too old to start. There was also Maria, a young mother and college student, juggling responsibilities but passionate about renewable energy. George saw in them reflections of himself, resilience, curiosity, and the courage to step into the unknown. Together, they brainstormed ideas, combined skills, and began prototyping simple machines that could make everyday life easier and more sustainable. The workshop wasn't just about technology, it was about community, connection, and purpose. One afternoon, George was invited to speak at the local library's monthly forum. The room was packed, faces curious and expectant. He spoke candidly about aging, innovation, and the power of mindset. "I was once trapped by my own doubts," he said. "I believed I was too old, too tired, too invisible. But then I found a spark, a refusal to accept limits, inspired by people like Elon Musk, who remind us that the impossible is just the untried." After the talk, a young woman approached him. "Your story helped me rethink my own fears," she said. "I'm starting a tech apprenticeship, and I wasn't sure if I had what it takes. Now I do." Moments like these rippled through George's life, weaving a tapestry of impact far beyond what he'd imagined. Meanwhile, Lisa watched George's transformation with awe and love. The man who had once retreated into quiet despair now radiated purpose and energy. Their relationship deepened, filled with shared dreams and renewed partnership. One evening, they sat by the fire pit in their backyard, stars glittering above like scattered hopes. "What do you see next?" Lisa asked. George smiled, the horizon wide before him. I see a future where no one feels too old to matter. Where ideas flow freely, unbounded by age or fear. Inspired by this vision, George began working on a proposal for a community innovation hub, a place where people of all ages could come together to learn, build, and inspire. He imagined workshops, mentorship programs, and events that celebrated lifelong creativity. The project gained traction quickly. Local businesses, schools, and government officials expressed support, recognizing the value in fostering intergenerational collaboration. George's story had become a beacon, a proof that transformation was possible at any stage of life. As plans took shape, George reflected on how far he'd come, from the quiet frustration of a man struggling with loneliness and loss to a leader shaping a new narrative. The journey was far from over, but with every step, he reclaimed pieces of himself and paved paths for others. One morning, as he read messages from the Second Spark community, one comment caught his eye: "Thank you for showing us that hope and purpose don't expire. We're building a future together, one idea at a time." George felt a warmth spread through him. That future was within reach. It was real. And it was theirs to create. With renewed determination, George set to work on the hub's design, pouring in every ounce of experience, creativity, and heart. The future was a canvas, and he was ready to paint a masterpiece, not just for himself, but for everyone daring to dream anew. In the quiet moments before sleep, George whispered a promise to himself: "I will keep pushing, keep building, and keep believing. Because this is just the beginning." And with that, he closed his eyes, ready to face whatever the new horizon held. George sat quietly on the worn wooden bench outside the community center, watching the afternoon light cast long shadows across the courtyard. The air was filled with the soft hum of conversation and laughter, young voices mingling with those seasoned by years. It was a beautiful sound, but for a moment, a shadow crossed George's heart. Despite the progress, despite the workshops and new friendships, a whisper of doubt crept in. Was his work truly making a difference? Was the fire still burning brightly enough to inspire others, or was it slowly fading? These questions haunted him during the long quiet hours of the night, when the house was still and the world seemed to pause. But then, just as the darkness threatened to settle, a message would arrive, a note from a young apprentice, a thank you from a community member, or a picture of a workshop project in progress. Those echoes of purpose rekindled his spirit. One such message came from Ava, the high school student who had once doubted her own abilities but had grown under George's mentorship. "I wanted to let you know," she wrote, "that I was accepted into the engineering program at State University. Your encouragement gave me the courage to apply." Tears filled George's eyes as he read her words. This was the true reward, not fame, not fortune, but the knowledge that he had touched lives and sparked change. In the following weeks, George's schedule grew busier, filled with speaking engagements, community events, and planning sessions for the Innovation Hub. Yet, amid the whirlwind, he carved out moments for quiet reflection. He visited the local cemetery one afternoon, standing before the headstone of his late wife, Ruth. The years since her passing had been marked by grief and healing, but also by transformation. "I wish you could see this," he whispered, tracing the name with a trembling finger. "I'm still here, still fighting, still dreaming, for both of us." The memories flooded back, the laughter, the shared dreams, the life they had built together. But instead of pain, George felt gratitude. Ruth's belief in him, even in the darkest times, had been a steady flame. Inspired by Elon Musk's fearless pursuit of impossible goals, George knew that purpose was a living thing, shaped by love, loss, and the courage to keep moving forward. At home, Lisa noticed the weight of George's quiet moments and offered her support without question. "You're doing something incredible," she said one evening, as they shared a simple meal. "Sometimes the burden of change feels heavy, but you don't carry it alone." Those words reminded George of the power of connection, how healing and strength often came from others willing to walk beside you. One afternoon, at the Innovation Hub's design meeting, George listened as community members shared ideas and concerns. Some worried about funding, others about reaching marginalized groups, and some feared that the project might not sustain momentum. George understood these fears deeply. Change was never easy, and the road was often winding. But he responded with calm determination, echoing a mindset he'd admired in Musk. It's about taking risks, learning from failure, and adapting. We'll build this together, step by step. The meeting ended on a hopeful note, with volunteers stepping forward to help and partnerships forming. The seeds of a lasting legacy were being planted. Meanwhile, George found unexpected joy in mentoring another young inventor, Jamal, who reminded him of the untapped potential in every individual. Jamal's energy and fresh perspective reinvigorated George's own creativity, blending experience and youth into a dynamic force. Their collaboration produced new prototypes and ideas, fueling the community's excitement. As the months passed, George's story attracted media attention beyond the local area. Journalists came to hear about the Innovation Hub, the glide car, and the movement of lifelong inventors defying stereotypes. Yet, George remained humble, always redirecting praise to the community and the shared spirit of perseverance. In one interview, when asked about his motivation, he said simply, "I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again." Those words resonated widely, inspiring countless others to reconsider what was possible in their own lives. Late one night, after a particularly rewarding day, George sat alone in the garage, surrounded by tools and sketches. He reflected on the journey. The moments of doubt, the breakthroughs, the storms weathered, and the people whose lives had intertwined with his own. The echoes of purpose he had heard through messages, smiles, and shared triumphs were a constant reminder that his life's work was more than just invention, it was about connection, meaning, and hope. As he prepared to rest, George felt a deep sense of peace. The path ahead was uncertain, but he knew he would face it with the same fearless spirit that had carried him this far. Inspired by Elon Musk's relentless innovation and refusal to accept limits, George was ready to keep pushing boundaries and lighting the way for others. The legacy he was building wasn't just his own, it belonged to everyone who dared to believe, to create, and to dream anew. And in that, he found a purpose that echoed far beyond himself. The late summer heat hung heavy over the town, wrapping itself around George like a thick blanket. The long days felt slower now, every tick of the clock a reminder that time was both a gift and a thief. George found himself standing at a crossroads, a moment in life that demanded a choice: cling to the comfortable rhythm he'd fought so hard to reawaken or step boldly into a new, uncertain chapter. The Innovation Hub was progressing steadily, but progress came with challenges, funding uncertainties, organizational headaches, and the constant tension between vision and reality. The weight of responsibility pressed on him, stirring doubts he had long thought conquered. One evening, after a particularly draining day of meetings, George sat on his porch with Lisa, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. "Maybe it's time to slow down," he confessed quietly, watching a lone bird soar against the fading light. "I'm tired, Lisa. Maybe I should let someone else take the reins." Lisa reached across the table, her hand warm and steady. "I see the fire in you, George. Slowing down isn't the answer, you're meant to keep moving forward. But it's okay to ask for help." Those words lingered, planting a seed of reflection. George realized that courage wasn't just about charging ahead alone, sometimes it meant trusting others, embracing vulnerability, and sharing the journey. Inspired by Elon Musk's own stories of setbacks and relentless pushing beyond limits, George knew that fear and uncertainty were part of every breakthrough. The next morning, George attended a gathering of local leaders and potential donors. The room buzzed with polite conversations and the clinking of coffee cups, but beneath the surface, the stakes were clear. Funding decisions would shape the future of the hub, and by extension, George's own role in it. When his turn came to speak, George took a deep breath, centering himself. "This project is about more than technology or innovation. It's about community, purpose, and proving that age does not define potential. We're creating a space where every voice matters, and every idea has value. His words resonated, sparking questions and thoughtful discussions. Some expressed skepticism, worried about sustainability. Others offered encouragement, moved by George's authenticity and vision. After the meeting, George felt a cautious optimism. The crossroads ahead were still daunting, but he wasn't walking the path alone. That afternoon, as he returned home, George found a letter in the mailbox, a handwritten note from Ava, the young woman he had mentored. "Thank you for believing in me," she wrote. "Your courage gave me strength when I needed it most. Keep shining your light." Tears blurred George's vision as he folded the letter carefully. Moments like this crystallized the choice before him. The easy path was to retreat, but the brave path was to lean into the discomfort, to keep building bridges across generations. In the days that followed, George made a series of difficult decisions. He delegated more responsibilities to trusted volunteers, trusting in their abilities and passion. He started hosting open forums to gather ideas and foster collaboration. And he committed to self-care, recognizing that endurance required balance, rest, and reflection. One evening, as George prepared for a community event showcasing projects from the Innovation Hub, he found himself pacing in the garage, nervous but determined. Lisa approached, offering a reassuring smile. "You've come so far, George. This is your moment." The event was a vibrant celebration of creativity and connection. Children demonstrated robotic arms, seniors shared stories of late-life discoveries, and local artists showcased inventions blending technology and tradition. George watched from the side, heart full as applause filled the room. Among the crowd, he spotted Ava, beaming with pride as she presented a solar-powered device. Their eyes met, and in that brief moment, George felt the courage to keep moving forward, beyond fear, beyond doubt. As the night wound down, George stood outside under the stars, the cool air a balm to his restless mind. He thought of Elon Musk's words, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." The odds had never been in George's favor, age, health, and skepticism all stacked against him. But the importance of his mission was undeniable. With steady breath, George made his choice. He would keep pushing forward, embracing the unknown with open arms and a fearless heart. The crossroads was not a barrier but a gateway, an invitation to courage, growth, and transformation. And George was ready to step through. The morning air was crisp with the scent of dew and fresh beginnings as George opened his laptop, scrolling through messages from people around the country who had discovered his story. What began as a small local effort had started to create ripples far beyond his quiet town, touching lives and igniting new sparks of hope. Each message told a story. Of seniors finding courage to start a new project, families coming together around shared innovation, and communities embracing lifelong creativity. George felt a profound sense of connection, as though the work he'd poured his soul into had woven an invisible thread binding countless lives together. It reminded him of Elon Musk's philosophy that ambitious ideas, when shared, could change the world, one person at a time. Over the next weeks, George and the team at the Innovation Hub organized a virtual conference to bring together creators of all ages from across the nation. The excitement was palpable as participants prepared to share inventions, stories, and visions for the future. The event streamed live, bridging distances and generations with conversations full of energy and possibility. George's keynote speech was heartfelt and honest. "We are living proof that age does not define innovation or impact. Our ideas and dreams are timeless," he said. This ripple effect started with a spark, maybe just a moment of courage or a single step beyond fear. Together, we can turn those ripples into waves that carry us forward. As the conference unfolded, George watched with awe as ideas flowed freely, a senior citizen teaching coding, a teenager designing adaptive technology, a retired engineer mentoring a group of young inventors. The synergy was electric, reminding him that the future belonged to those brave enough to create it, no matter their age. The following day, a local news crew interviewed George and several participants, highlighting the movement and its growing momentum. Viewers called in, inspired by the stories of resilience and collaboration. George received invitations to speak at other communities, universities, and organizations eager to replicate the model. Yet despite the growing recognition, George remained grounded, always emphasizing that the true power was in collective action. "It's not about me," he would say. "It's about all of us, coming together to redefine what's possible." Back home, Lisa marveled at George's transformation from a man burdened by doubt to a leader sparking change across states. Their evenings were filled with plans, dreams, and quiet moments of gratitude. One afternoon, as George worked on a prototype with Jamal, the young inventor, they brainstormed ways to make sustainable technology more accessible to low-income communities. This new direction felt deeply meaningful, a chance to ensure that innovation served everyone, not just the privileged few. George realized that the ripple effect was becoming a tidal wave of social good. He thought of the countless seniors who had been written off by society but who, given the chance, could contribute wisdom, skill, and passion. The Innovation Hub began partnering with local schools, senior centers, and nonprofits to expand its reach and impact. George visited a nearby retirement community to host a workshop, and the room buzzed with eager learners who had rediscovered joy in creating. Their stories inspired him, each a testament to the enduring human spirit. Yet with growth came challenges, balancing expansion with the original mission, managing resources, and maintaining the community's close-knit feel. George tackled these with openness, fostering transparency and inviting feedback. He embraced Musk's lesson that innovation required constant iteration and humility. One evening, after a long day, George and Lisa walked along the riverbank, the water reflecting the stars. "Sometimes I wonder if we're really making a difference," George admitted. Lisa squeezed his hand. "Look at the faces you've touched, the dreams you've helped rebuild. That's the difference." George smiled, feeling the truth of her words wash over him. The ripple effect wasn't just about projects or inventions, it was about lives rekindled, connections restored, and hope reborn. As the hub celebrated its first anniversary, George stood before the community once more, reflecting on the journey. "This is just the beginning," he said, voice steady with conviction. "Our ripples will become waves, and together, we'll change the world, one idea, one heart at a time." In that moment, surrounded by friends, family, and new dreamers, George knew that age was no longer a limit. It was a strength, a wellspring of resilience and wisdom fueling a brighter tomorrow. The sun had barely risen when George sat alone in the quiet of his workshop, the familiar smell of sawdust and metal comforting yet somehow heavy on his chest. Despite the growing momentum of the Innovation Hub and the ripples spreading far beyond his town, a persistent shadow of doubt had begun to creep in, threatening to dim the fire he had fought so hard to rekindle. It was not the kind of doubt that came from the outside world, though skepticism was inevitable, it was a deeper, more personal unease. The quiet voice inside that whispered, "Are you enough? Can you really sustain this? Is this all just a fleeting dream?" Those questions had haunted George in his lonelier moments, pulling him back into the isolation he'd once thought permanent. Yet unlike before, he no longer ran from the discomfort. Instead, he faced it, wrestling with uncertainty in the hope of finding clarity. The night before, he'd received an email from a longtime friend and former colleague, Frank, who had once shared his passion for invention but had since retreated into cynicism. Frank's message was blunt: "George, I admire what you're doing, but be careful. Sometimes it's better to accept limits than to chase impossible dreams at our age." The words stung, stirring a mix of anger, sadness, and self-questioning. Was George being naive? Was he risking everything for an idea that might never fully take hold? As the morning light grew, George reminded himself of Elon Musk's relentless drive, the countless failures, the criticisms, the setbacks Musk had endured without losing sight of his vision. Musk's courage wasn't born from certainty but from a refusal to be defined by fear. Drawing strength from that example, George decided to push through his doubts by turning inward and reconnecting with his why. He revisited the letters from community members, the messages from young inventors, and the smiles of seniors rediscovering purpose. Each story was a thread in the fabric of hope he was weaving. Mid-morning, George met with the hub's leadership team to address growing concerns about funding and sustainability. The conversation was honest and sometimes tense. Some members worried that expansion was outpacing resources, others feared mission drift, losing sight of the core purpose amid the buzz of publicity and growth. George listened carefully, valuing each perspective. He knew that leadership meant balancing vision with pragmatism and that part of the journey involved navigating these complex waters. Drawing on the resilience he had cultivated, he shared a renewed commitment: we will stay true to our mission. We will adapt, learn, and grow together. Challenges are part of the process, they don't define us. That evening, George took a solitary walk through the town's park, the cool breeze brushing past him like a reminder of life's ever-changing currents. He paused by an old oak tree, its branches sturdy and weathered, roots deep in the earth. It was a symbol of endurance and growth, reminding him that even the tallest trees had weathered storms. He thought of his own life. Of losses, setbacks, and moments of despair. Yet here he was, still standing, still reaching for the sky. The next day brought a surprise visit from Ava, now a confident young woman with bright eyes and a steady smile. "I wanted to check in," she said warmly. "Your work has changed how I see myself, and what's possible." Her presence was a balm to George's soul, a reminder that impact was not measured in grand gestures alone but in quiet transformations. Together, they brainstormed new initiatives aimed at expanding mentorship and skill-building opportunities for youth. The energy in their collaboration was infectious, filling George with renewed purpose. Yet the shadow of doubt lingered in quieter moments, prompting him to seek counsel from Lisa. Over cups of steaming tea, they spoke honestly about fears and hopes. Lisa reminded him gently, "Doubt is part of growth. It means you care. But don't let it stop you from stepping forward." Encouraged, George began to develop a plan to address concerns transparently, hosting open forums, sharing progress and setbacks alike, and inviting community input. This approach deepened trust and strengthened the collective resolve. In the weeks that followed, George found that facing doubt head-on was a form of courage in itself. He embraced vulnerability as a source of connection rather than weakness. As a result, the Innovation Hub grew stronger, more inclusive, and more resilient. One afternoon, as George prepared for a town hall meeting, he received a call from a national foundation interested in funding their expansion, but only if they could demonstrate measurable outcomes within the next year. The challenge was daunting, but George saw it as an opportunity to refine their goals and deepen their impact. Standing before the gathered community that evening, George spoke with humility and strength: "We're on a journey together, a journey with ups and downs. I don't have all the answers, but I promise to keep moving forward, learning, and growing with you." The room responded with applause and renewed energy. In that moment, George understood that the weight of doubt was not a barrier but a signpost, an invitation to lead with authenticity and courage. As he left the meeting, the cool night air felt lighter, and the stars overhead seemed to wink in quiet encouragement. George knew the road ahead would still have obstacles, but he was no longer alone in carrying the burden. The ripple effect had become a wave of shared strength and possibility. And with that, George was ready to keep pushing beyond doubt toward the horizon of endless potential. The dawn spilled golden light across the quiet streets of George's town as he sat sipping his coffee, a familiar calm settling over him. The journey had been long and winding, filled with moments of fear, triumph, and transformation. But now, as the Innovation Hub gained traction and his community blossomed with renewed energy, George felt the stirrings of something new, a call toward unexplored horizons. The local impact had been profound, yet George's vision began to stretch beyond the borders of his small town. Invitations came from neighboring cities, curious about replicating the model that defied stereotypes of aging and innovation. With each conversation, George's belief deepened: the power of reinvention was universal. That morning, he reviewed plans for a regional conference aimed at connecting lifelong learners, inventors, and dreamers from across the state. The excitement in the team was palpable. This event could serve as a beacon for others seeking purpose and community. As he prepared his speech, George reflected on the lessons learned from Elon Musk's relentless pursuit of progress, the willingness to embrace uncertainty and the courage to challenge conventional wisdom. Those principles had become the backbone of his own transformation. Later that day, George met with Lisa to discuss expansion plans. They walked through the community garden, now flourishing with late summer blooms, the air fragrant with earth and possibility. "It's amazing how far we've come," Lisa said, her eyes shining with pride. "And it's just the beginning." George nodded, feeling the truth of her words deep in his bones. Together, they planned ways to maintain the heart of the movement even as it grew, prioritizing inclusivity, accessibility, and genuine connection. One of the most exciting developments was the launch of a mobile innovation lab, an idea born during a brainstorming session with Jamal and other young creators. This traveling workshop would bring tools, technology, and mentorship to remote and underserved areas, extending the ripple effect of empowerment. The concept resonated deeply with George's belief that opportunity should know no boundaries. In the weeks leading up to the conference, George found himself increasingly energized by the stories of those they had touched, retirees starting second careers, families rekindling bonds through shared projects, and young people inspired by the wisdom of their elders. Each narrative was a testament to the human capacity for growth and connection. Yet with growth came new challenges. George grappled with questions about leadership, sustainability, and staying true to the original mission amid scaling pressures. He sought guidance from mentors, peers, and even reached out to a network of social innovators, drawing on collective wisdom. One afternoon, during a quiet moment in the workshop, George penned a letter to his late wife, Ruth. "We've come so far," he wrote, "and there's so much more ahead. Thank you for believing in me, even when I doubted myself. I'm carrying your spirit with me." The act of writing brought clarity and renewed resolve. At the conference, George stood on stage before a diverse crowd, ages, backgrounds, and stories woven together by a shared hunger for purpose. His speech was candid and heartfelt. We all face moments when the future feels uncertain, when doubt creeps in. But it's in those moments that we find our true strength. Together, we can create a world where age is not a limitation, but a foundation for innovation and joy. The audience responded with standing ovations and tears, the room alive with hope. Afterward, George mingled with attendees, hearing firsthand how the movement was inspiring new beginnings far and wide. Among the crowd was a delegation from a major nonprofit interested in partnering to expand access to technology for seniors nationwide. This opportunity felt like a doorway to a new horizon, one that held promise, challenge, and immense potential. Back home, as George reflected on the conference's success, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey had been shaped by countless hands and hearts, each contributing to a shared dream. He realized that the true legacy wasn't just the inventions or programs but the spirit of possibility ignited in every person who had dared to believe in themselves again. That night, under a sky glittering with stars, George made a quiet vow. No matter what the future held, he would continue to push boundaries, embrace change, and live with the fearless curiosity that had brought him this far. Inspired by Elon Musk's example of radical thinking and resilience, George was ready to explore new horizons, carrying the light of transformation wherever the road led. The early morning fog clung softly to the town as George walked down familiar streets, the rhythm of his footsteps echoing memories long tucked away. He passed by the old bakery where he had once stopped for morning coffee with Ruth, the small park bench where he'd shared dreams with his children, and the quiet churchyard where friends and family rested. Each place held fragments of a life that felt both distant and intimately his. Today, the journey felt like a full circle, an arc from loss and regret toward hope and purpose renewed. The transformation wasn't just in the innovation hub or the ripple effect it had created, but within George himself. Years ago, he had felt invisible, weighed down by age and missed opportunities. Now, he was a beacon for others seeking light in their own shadows. As he approached the community center where the hub had taken root, George paused. The building buzzed with activity, young and old collaborating, inventing, laughing. It was a living testament to the power of second chances. Inside, he found Lisa arranging materials for an upcoming workshop. "Morning, George," she said with a smile that spoke volumes of shared struggles and triumphs. "Ready for another day of changing the world?" George laughed softly. "Always." The day's agenda was full: mentoring sessions, planning meetings, and a special event celebrating milestones. But amidst the busyness, George carved out moments for reflection. He pulled out a worn photo album, flipping through images of Ruth, of his children growing up, and snapshots from the early days of the hub. Each photo stirred emotions: joy, sorrow, longing. Yet none overshadowed the gratitude he felt for the path he'd chosen. Later, during a quiet break, George found himself outside under the sprawling branches of the old oak tree. The same tree where he had once found solace during times of doubt now stood as a symbol of enduring strength. He thought of the lessons learned, that age was not a sentence but a doorway, that courage was forged in the fires of uncertainty, that community and connection were the true engines of transformation. That evening, a group gathered for the milestone celebration. Stories were shared, laughter echoed, and tears were shed. Ava spoke passionately about how the hub had changed her life, Jamal showcased a new invention designed to assist seniors with mobility, and Lisa honored George's unwavering dedication. When it was George's turn to speak, he felt a calmness that had once eluded him. This journey started with a question: what if everything we believed about getting old was wrong? What if our greatest contributions are yet to come? His voice was steady, filled with conviction. "I was once lost in doubt and fear, but I found my way through the courage to change, the support of a community, and the belief that every moment is an opportunity." Applause swelled as George looked around the room, seeing faces lit with hope and determination. After the event, as the crowd dispersed, George and Lisa walked slowly under the starry sky. "I never imagined this," George admitted. "That my later years could be the most meaningful." Lisa squeezed his hand. "You were never too old. You just needed permission to matter again, and you gave that permission to yourself." The words settled in his heart like a warm embrace. In the days that followed, George began drafting a memoir, not just of his journey but of the countless stories that had shaped it. He wanted to leave a legacy grounded in action and authenticity, a roadmap for others who might feel lost or forgotten. One afternoon, he received a call from a national public radio station interested in sharing his story. The interview was candid and heartfelt, touching on fears, failures, and the unexpected joys of reinvention. When asked about Elon Musk's influence, George smiled. "He's a symbol of radical thinking and relentless pursuit, a reminder that limitations, whether age, fear, or circumstance, are meant to be challenged." As the interview aired, messages poured in from listeners inspired to start their own journeys. George realized that his story was no longer just his own, it belonged to everyone willing to believe in possibility. Standing once more beneath the oak tree, George closed his eyes and breathed deeply. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying with it the echoes of a life transformed. He understood now that the journey was never about erasing the past but embracing it, using every experience, every loss, every joy, as fuel for what lay ahead. The circle was complete, but the path continued, winding forward into new adventures and discoveries. And George was ready. The morning sun filtered gently through the curtains as George awoke, a quiet sense of peace settling over him that had once seemed impossible. The years of struggle, doubt, and rediscovery had led him here, to a place where the past no longer weighed him down, and the future shimmered with promise. Today marked the final step in a journey that began with a single question: what if everything I believed about getting old was wrong? The room was filled with familiar mementos, photos of Ruth, reminders of their shared dreams, and notes from the countless people whose lives had been touched by George's work. He ran his fingers over the framed letter Elon Musk had once sent, a simple encouragement to keep pushing boundaries, no matter the odds. It had been a spark, a symbol of radical thinking and fearless action that had inspired George to defy limitations and reclaim his purpose. The Innovation Hub was bustling downstairs, a vibrant mix of generations collaborating and creating. George smiled, knowing that the seeds he had planted were growing into something far greater than himself. His own story was no longer just about personal transformation, it had become a movement, a legacy of empowerment, resilience, and community. Today, George was scheduled to speak at a national conference for lifelong learners and innovators, a platform to share the truth he had lived. As he prepared his notes, he reflected on the journey, the setbacks that tested his resolve, the moments of doubt that threatened to halt his progress, and the breakthroughs that rekindled his spirit. Each chapter of his life had led to this moment. On stage, under the bright lights and before a sea of eager faces, George spoke with a calm passion that resonated deeply. For too long, we have been told that aging is a decline, that our best days are behind us. But I'm here to tell you that this is a lie, a story we no longer have to believe. His voice carried the weight of lived experience and the hope of endless possibility. We are not too old to dream, to create, to change. Our age is not a barrier but a foundation, built on decades of wisdom, resilience, and love. It's never too late to start again. The audience listened intently as George shared stories of the Innovation Hub, the ripple effect that had spread beyond his town, and the countless lives transformed by embracing courage and community. He spoke of Elon Musk, not as a savior, but as a symbol of relentless curiosity and daring to push boundaries. We all have an Elon inside us, a spark that refuses to be extinguished by fear or age. It's that spark that drives us to build, to connect, and to make the world better. The applause was thunderous, but George knew the real victory was in the quiet moments, the letters he received from seniors starting new businesses, the young people finding mentors in unexpected places, and the families reunited through shared purpose. Backstage, Lisa greeted him with a proud smile. "You've come so far," she said softly. "And you're just getting started." That night, George returned home feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. He sat by the fireplace, a journal open on his lap, and began to write, not about the past, but about the future he hoped to inspire. "I was never too old," he penned. "I was just waiting for permission to matter again." That permission came from within, fueled by the courage to face fear, the grace to accept help, and the determination to keep moving forward. He closed the journal and looked out the window at the stars. The vastness of the universe was a reminder of infinite possibility, no matter where we are in life. Over the following months, George worked tirelessly to expand the hub's reach, forging partnerships, securing funding, and developing programs that prioritized accessibility and inclusion. He advocated for policy changes to support lifelong learning and innovation among seniors. His message echoed nationwide, challenging outdated notions and inspiring a cultural shift. Yet despite the recognition and success, George remained grounded. He knew that true legacy wasn't measured in accolades but in the lives touched, the barriers broken, and the hope rekindled. On a quiet afternoon, surrounded by friends old and new, George hosted a celebration at the hub. Stories were shared, inventions unveiled, and dreams declared. The room thrummed with energy, a living testament to the power of believing in oneself at any age. As the sun dipped below the horizon, George stood before the group and spoke one last time that day. "We've come full circle, from fear to hope, from doubt to action. This is our legacy, not a final destination, but a living, breathing journey of endless possibility. Let us carry this torch forward, lighting the way for those who come after us." The crowd erupted in applause, their faces shining with gratitude and determination. Later, as the night deepened, George sat quietly with Lisa. "I never thought I'd feel this alive again," he confessed. "It's like I'm just getting started." Lisa smiled. "That's the power of never giving up. You showed us all what it means to keep dreaming." George looked up at the stars once more, the vast expanse a mirror of his own limitless potential. His journey had transformed not only his life but the lives of countless others, proof that it is never too late to change, to grow, and to matter. The future was bright, and George was ready to walk boldly into it, carrying the new legacy he had created, one of courage, connection, and relentless hope. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?